So welcome. It's almost 5:30 PM and I'm calling the March 5th, 2024 meeting of the Historic Site Preservation Board to order. May we please have the roll call?
Yes. Chair Huff,
Present.
Vice Chair Nelson,
Present.
Member Hanson,
Present.
Member Rosenau,
Present.
Member Bachman,
Present.
Member Hurd,
Present.
and Member Malisi.
Here.
We have all members present.
All present. Thank you. May we please have the staff report on the posting of the agenda?
Yes. The agenda for this meeting was posted for public review at the City Hall Bulletin Board on the west side of City Council chambers and in the planning department in accordance with the city ordinance.
Very well. Does the board have any revisions to the agenda? Any revisions, anyone? Okay. May I please have a motion to approve the agenda? Okay. Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Rosenau and a second by Mr. Hare. Is there any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, I call for the question. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? No. So we have 7, the motion passes 7-0. Thank you. So this time has been set aside for members of the public to discuss the Historic Site Preservation Board on agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter of jurisdiction of the board. Although the Historic Site Board values your comments pursuant to the Brown Act, it generally cannot take any action on items not listed on the posted agenda. So there would be 3 minutes assigned for each speaker. Testimony for public hearings is taken at the time of the hearing. So staff, has anyone requested a comment on non-public hearing item today?
No, we haven't received any non-public.
Okay. All right, so seeing none and no speakers, we will proceed to the consent agenda, which is the approval of the minutes. Are there any revisions to the minutes of the meeting of February 6, 2024? Any corrections or revisions, anyone? That might be a record, huh?
We're shorter now.
But they're shorter now, so good job. Very, very, just it's action only. So may I please have a motion to approve the minutes of February 6th?
I motion.
Okay, so Mr. Maruzzi has made a motion. May I have a second, please? I second. Second, Member Hanson, a second. So is there any discussion about the minutes other than that they're? Okay. So seeing none, call for the question. All in favor of the motion to approve the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. So the motion passes 7-0. So moving along the agenda, there are no public hearings today nor unfinished business. So let us proceed to agenda item 4A, which is new business. And this is a request by the Mizrahi Trust for approval of a major alteration of a Site 3, Class 3 site located at 211 North Sunrise Way. So Sarah, may I please have a report?
Yes. All right, the application before HSPD today is a property classified class 3 at the address 211 North Sunrise Way. The building, formerly known as a gas company building, is where 211 North Sunrise is located. The owner has submitted an application showing a design proposal that qualifies as a major alteration for a class 3 site. This photograph was taken just last week, ironically with the sunrise on the building. It shows the building, as you see it from Sunrise Way as it stands today, and you can see that the building is constructed using poured in place concrete, has a very public facing entrance along a major street. It's one that has a pretty predominant presence. Just to give you a more recent background, the parcel was recently granted a lot split by the planning commission just last week, which resulted in the creation of 2 conforming lots. With the existing building remaining in its current location, in its historic location at the corner, Sunrise and Andreas, and that's represented in this drawing in red. So we will be dealing specifically with parcel 2, which contains the existing building. While our discussion today is not focused on the proposed design for the existing building, the inclusion of this information was done to help clarify that the proposed work ultimately triggers that section of major alteration to a class 3 site. And that's why it's before the HSPB board today in accordance to section 8.05. 130. So when HSPB reviews alterations made to a class 3 site, they are tasked to determine if the current property merits historic landmark status, which means they have to evaluate the property against the designation criteria listed in 8.05.070 and the integrity findings with the application, with the information presented in the application. The current application doesn't supply all the information that we need to fully evaluate. However, given what we do know about the property and the exterior appearance of the building itself, staff does find that the building is a rare example of brutalist architecture within the city limits. It's a piece done by the architect Robert McCarty, identified as a local and important practitioner who worked closely with Hugh Kapner. And he is the record architect on record for this building. With more extensive research, other criteria for historic significance may be further evaluated. When it comes to the material integrity, it appears that all 7 topics may be met because it appears that the alterations to the building over time were quite minimal. We see some alterations related to ADA compliance and some building code related changes. However, we don't see a large addition or anything that has significantly changed the building footprint, but we do need more information to verify these, the integrity analysis. The historic preservation ordinance requires HSPB to evaluate the application with the 2 potential outcomes. HSPB may either make a finding that the site has historic significance and is worthy of historic designation and place a stay of alteration on the property to pursue designation proceedings, or to determine that the property is insufficient and does not meet the historic criteria for historic designation as a landmark status and take no action. So those are the 2 outcomes that HSBB can make for today's meeting. And staff does find that as the property as it stands today has serious potential to meet criteria for historic designation, therefore recommends that HSBB place a stay of alteration on the proposed project so that we may start the designation proceedings to see if the property qualifies to be redesignated as a class 1 or class 2 site. The owner is here today. They are, as part of this application, not seeking historic designation, however, are very aware of the importance of this building. And just to reiterate, staff recommendation is that HSPB put a stay so that we can evaluate the property for historic designation. So that I can take any questions related to the report. Again, I'd like to remind everyone that really our, discussion should be around the fact that, around if the property merits, further review for historic designation or, to take no action and allow the, application to move forward.
Thank you. So does the board have any questions for staff? Any questions for staff? So what's the zoning in that area?
The zoning, so it's in section 14, and I believe it's MR, which is, medium residential.
So is that mixed? So,
Primarily residential.
Yeah, primarily.
Primarily residential.
primarily, okay. Yes. Member,
Is it a feasible parcel? Feasible?
Yes, it was lot split at the fee simple parcel.
Thanks.
okay. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Member Nelson.
same question. Since this total, lot split has already been approved, how would the, lack of parking for the historic resource affect, the way that we, designate it? If we so choose to reclassify it to a higher level, does that change what kind of a building it is? If it doesn't have parking, is it no longer a commercial structure? And it's just seems odd to me that all the parking has gone away.
Well, I guess initially the building was designed with a specific use and a need for parking that no longer exists. When they reviewed the lot split application, they were looking to make sure that they are creating, lots that are conforming to the underlying zoning. What is planned on parcel 2 is kind of yet to be determined, and when they bring in that application, we would have to review it for parking requirements for whatever use is presented. I would like to add in the caveat that as if it is a historically designated property, there may be some discussion available per the code related to parking requirements, I believe for commercial use. But we would have to evaluate it based on what is presented before the board, and make sure that it complies with the requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions of the board for staff? Member Hanson?
So if it was zone commercial before, did the lot split also rezone it to the residential use, or is that a separate process?
So right now, it's not zoned commercial, it is zoned, MR.
Did they do that previously when they were selling it, maybe? I mean, I know this isn't, I was just curious.
I think the part of the city's section 14 specific plan that was approved probably initially 20 years ago or more, and then more recently updated in 2014, established that new use for the site.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, yes, member Nelson, Vice Chair Nelson.
Thank you. The plan for the other parcel, whatever is being built there, has that been approved?
That has not been, vetted, the only application that has been approved is for the lot split.
Okay, good, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, seeing no other questions, does the applicant wish to speak and share some more information about the property and the project for board's consideration? Would you like to come forward? So, okay, Ms. Riley, you have about 3 minutes. If you would just tell us a little bit more about your project.
hit and during COVID, things were kind of difficult, so we went through a process of trying to figure out what to do with the site. We started from a variety of ideas and we brainstormed. We talked to a variety of real estate agents, people in the business, tried to figure out what we can do with this site. Ultimately, we came up with a program that we feel it will be suitable for this location and therefore, we start talking to planning and we realized, we knew that the building is on the historical watch list, but yet was not designated. Sarah kind of enticed me with the process and that's why I'm here. So I would love to take this building to the next level and be the proud owner of a beautiful historical building. And we have some great plans. And by the way, the architect who's working on this project, she sat, just so you know, she sat in the historical board of the city of Glendale for 12 years. So she's very familiar with the historical process and as a matter of fact, I did a project with her back in Glendale that we did a facade improvement on this building and the city of Glendale Historical Society, they commended us and they awarded us for the work that we did. So, and that was like 30 years ago.
Good, good track record. Thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate having that background. That's good. So does the board have any questions or comments? Vice Chair Nelson?
Just a comment. I would like to commend you for your successful adaptive reuse of the corridor project at 515 West Palm Canyon Drive, where Coffee is located, along with Just Fabulous and Brian O'Brien and all of that. I was on the opening team of Coffee in August of 2002. Well, I remember what it was like back then, and I've seen the evolution of the project from then to now, and it is truly an amazing local adaptive reuse of stuff. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. I've enjoyed it, actually,
I'm sure.
still enjoying it.
So are there any questions or comments or discussion from any of our board members? No? Well, I think we're very supportive of that, your project and very attractive, maintaining the integrity of the building, which is very important. So, seeing no further questions, may I please have a motion? Okay,
I recommend to stay the request for alteration for a period of 120 days and authorize the processing of a designation application to consider whether the building qualifies for a designation of a class 1 or class 2 historic resource.
okay.
And I would second that.
Okay, super. So we have a motion by member Hanson and a second by member Maruzzi. Is there any further discussion? Yes.
Yeah, I would like
Vice Chair.
to
Yes.
amend possibly the motion pending a question to staff. You're recommending 120 days as opposed to 90.
100 and
Up to,
Yeah, it's up to, so
It could be 30.
that's-
Okay,
it's pretty much
up to, okay, all right.
the standard language that we have.
Yeah, it's of 120 days, it doesn't say up to, that's why I was clarifying. Okay, great.
but it is,
So,
correct.
I'm in support of that then.
Okay,
If it
All
says
right.
up to, that's great.
okay. Put the up in there.
Yeah. put the up
Okay,
in.
put the up in there. Okay. So we have a motion and a second, and any other discussion? Any other? Okay, so all in favor, please say aye of the motion.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed to the motion? No, super. So motion passes 7-0. Thank you very much. Good
Thank you.
luck and
Thank
good
you.
work.
Thank you.
Okie dokie. So, let us proceed to discussions, agenda item 5A, beginning with the Historic Site Preservation Board work plan. Sarah Yoon prepared a memorandum to guide our discussion today. And then following the discussion, the board, we would like the board to approve the final work plan for 2024 and receive assignments and get moving forward on this. So Sarah, would you please begin and summarize?
Yes. As presented in the packet, I tried my best to distill all of our conversations, we've had quite a few. And I believe where we landed is, focusing our attention this year on the nomination process for city initiated projects. And then starting, the process for looking at maintenance related to historic properties. And then I believe we said that the training opportunities is something that we should be doing in an ongoing process. And we had a member of the HSBB board volunteer to help with that process as well. So that's actually kind of a separated thing. So it really is focusing on the nomination process and gathering information related to maintenance of historic properties. I outlined it in a way where we have the goal, the outcome, and some sort of deliverable so that we can keep ourselves on track. I created a work schedule for us. And all of this is amenable to change, and so it really is just serving as the basis for our discussion and making sure we're on track. And that we have something to measure at the end of the year, saying this is what we have produced as part of our work plan. As you all had reiterated, the city initiated projects are quite important. And something that we are we have actively been involved in. However, we don't really have a set of criteria in making sure that we are nominating projects that help support our contact statements, and making sure that our inventory really is cohesive of all the values that we've identified. And so making sure we have a strong nomination process with criteria, I think will help us get us there. And so that is that first piece. And then of course deliverables are listed there as an analysis of the existing inventory, understanding community efforts and what they would like to see as part of our inventory, and then finalizing that process and initially getting to some sort of list using those criteria. The maintenance of the historic properties, doing case study research is going to be pretty important, just making sure that we understand what other communities are doing, but also identifying what maintenance issues we see in our community. So doing that legwork is going to be pretty vital before we can start creating recommendations. And so starting that work as part of this work plan is what I distill from our meetings and our work set or our study session previously. And then I'll be working closely with Janet related to some of the training opportunities and how we can provide those. The topics are kind of related to the ones that we've talked to, the citywide contact statements, the historic surveys, criteria. And so I listed them out, and they can be torn apart and rearranged however we see fit, but that's the guideline for us to have that discussion. And then at the end of that discussion, we would like to go ahead and approve a work plan for the 2024.
And assignments. Okay, very good. Thank you for putting all that discussion into a good outline for us of those three major initiatives. So how does everyone feel about the outline that is presented to us? Does this capture what we've discussed and what we felt were priorities for this year already? Everybody, any comments that you remember, Hanson?
Yeah, I think, we had a really robust discussion and I think Sarah did a really good job of getting it all down and making sense of it and actually making it pretty easy to read, understand. And this is a calendar year, right?
This is a
I
calendar.
should know that by now, right?
Yeah.
I guess maybe one of my comments just on the training opportunities would be, I think it might make more sense to do historic surveys and context statement part 1 and historic surveys and context statement part 2, because it's really hard to separate them out. I mean, you could have separate discussions, but they really were gonna focus on Palm Springs survey and context statement, so I think they kind of go hand in hand, and I would start with talking about surveys and introducing context statements, and then maybe part two would. So I just would maybe flip those and just do part one and part two, and then I think the preservation criteria would work. And then just with regard to the nomination process, I guess that works, because I think it would be helpful to have some background on the survey and context statement as sort of a precursor to some of the tasks that you list under your bullet points here for, you know, existing inventory analysis by category. So that's where if we're talking about the survey,
Mhm.
and what we have now is an inventory from the survey. So if that would give enough time. But I think starting with that and then the outreach after that would probably. And there'd be separate people working on that anyway, right?
Yeah, and we can discuss that.
Okay.
I honestly kept it pretty open to
Mhm.
see, I mean, everyone has different timeframes. I don't know when everyone's here, you know, so it's kind of open to where people would like to contribute.
And then just questions on subcommittees, there would have to be 2 or 3 people.
Leave so, and unless we want to notice that. Yeah.
And then is the idea that people would meet somehow separately, or however the teams, committee, subcommittees decide to meet?
Mhm.
Yeah, okay.
Some kind of contingent
And
on.
all drawn from the board? The
Yes.
subcommittees are board members only
Only board
with
members.
staff. Okay.
But staff would be involved in subcommittee meetings,
Mhm.
so that makes sense to do a site here, I would assume.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yes. Vice
Um,
Chair
yeah,
Nelson. Mhm.
It's a great look, thank you. Since I've been a major proponent of maintenance, I'm going ahead and volunteering for that committee right now. Thank you.
Good, moving right ahead, like that. So, do we wanna, have any other comments, or do we just kind of wanna go around, the circle? And you can express, your expertise and your knowledge and your interest for a particular, topic. Want to do that? So we know Jade and we know Janet is on, the training opportunities. And so, Rosanelle,
I'd be happy to work on the first of all, the nomination process.
okay. Good,
That would be my
Okay.
area of expertise as well.
okay, member Air,
Yes.
and Rosanelle, okay, I'm writing that down. Putting it in ink. Next,
If there's an option for a third person on that, I would too.
that's
fine.
the fun part, isn't it?
That's the part I've got
And, well, that's good.
the handle on.
Okay, super. So, Bachman is added to that. So we have those 3 names for that. So,
Maintenance.
maintenance, Maruzi. Maruzi,
Well, this is.
Maruzi. Okay. And that leaves me. So, I guess I'll join Janet, I guess, in training opportunities, or I'll clean up with you, whatever. you
Clean
like.
up.
I clean up, okay? So, because my term is up in June,
Yeah,
so, I'll go where I need it. How's that?
Oh,
How does that sound?
so just the chance of reappointments,
I've already been here.
so that's the end.
I know, but I'm still around and I can help and volunteer in other sub-course. So, okay, so we've accepted, the topics. We've established the, committees and people. And so, how would, do you have any comments on how we should proceed?
Well, I just wanted to confirm to, the dates, just to make sure, those dates are actually dates that we meet, at the
Mhm.
HSBB board.
Mhm.
We just wanted to make sure that that actually makes the most sense and it's, as part of this, yeah.
Question.
Yes, yeah, there was a question.
So for maintenance, is that listed here as on the calendar?
It's green.
Mhm.
Yours is black and white.
Oh,
But
Oh,
over there.
yeah, you're lime green.
Very good.
I didn't print that out in color. I'm sorry. Okay, you're squared away with. the
I'm
color?
straight away.
Okay, so Vice Chair Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Another question regarding maintenance. Just for staff, would this be, when we meet as a subcommittee, would we, have someone from code enforcement that would get in on that, or would they provide us with a list perhaps of complaints or a log of, requests that they've gotten for properties that may be historical cost goods?
I mean, that's something that we could include as part of the case study research and, I'm assuming that we can, Zach can help you with that,
Okay.
just gathering those inquiries. We wouldn't necessarily have an officer here at the meeting, but collecting that data would be important to help us with understanding the existing conditions, so we can add that in.
Okay, because the reason I asked is because when I had asked in a prior meeting and also privately about board members improving our historic site inventory and taking notes and then submitting them, you had advised against that. So that's why I'm trying to find out what we will be working off of in the maintenance subcommittee. Will we be working off of things that are coming directly from the staff and code enforcement and planning? Or will we be coming up with these things or a combination of both?
I mean, that's kind of, we could discuss it further, just to see if there's enough data there in terms of the complaints that have been officially filed. If there are things that you've noticed just as a resident that you would say, hey, this is something that is reoccurring, not necessarily specifying a specific property. That may be another way to just refer to, we see these types of maintenance issues generally. We just want to be careful. We're not policing for the maintenance piece. We're just trying to collect kind of issues that we see and go from there so that we can make informed recommendations.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so, to summarize, you know, we have the three topics. And then we have our committees. Do I need to repeat the names of the committees? Or do we all have that? Do you have it, Sarah?
I do.
Okay,
And
so,
I'll update this list with the members and then I can
Mhm.
send them back out as part of
Mhm.
this
Very
document.
good.
and this group.
Well, thank you for organizing it so well. That's how we were so quickly able to grasp our work plan. So, so now may I have a motion to approve the final, work plan, for this year? Motion, please. Okay, so, I have a motion by, member Rosenau. May I have a second? Okay, so I have a second by, Vice Chair Nelson. Is there any further discussion? Yes?
I just
Member
wanted to
Nelson?
make sure that that includes just the two changes I made on the first two dates.
The
for
order.
Training opportunities to combine, the survey inventory with the context data
Yeah.
and do part 1 and 2.
Mhm. So, and you have that, sir?
Yes.
Yes, yes. Very good. So, thank you. So, is there any further discussion on the motion or the subject topics? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? No? Okay, so motion passes 7-0. Thank you very much. Super. Okay, next, let us proceed to discussions agenda, item 5B. And just to summarize a little bit, we had a meeting on August 31st, 2023, which was a study session meeting. And board members suggested plans for the city's next Preservation Matters Symposium. And we discussed, our last symposium, what worked, what didn't work, and how we should move forward. So highlights of that discussion, to remind you, included selecting an April date, 2025. We thought by postponing it would allow us more lead time for planning and budgeting, and obtaining funding and establishing, the resources that we needed. So at that study session, it was determined, or discussed that we should have one full day symposium with a box lunch, as opposed to having 2 half days. And so discussion, included continuing the, Historic Site Preservation Board Awards and the exhibition of the student architectural models. But we decided that we should discontinue the complimentary, private tours after the sessions, because of the huge amount of work that is involved and, the participation of the homeowners, property owners, so that we decided to not do that because the attendance, really dropped due to no-shows because it was free. And we'll let other organizations do those home tours or private property, public property tours. So today, we'd like to formulate ideas for the next symposium. And so we have our sheet up there, action plan, that we would like to take today. And so Sarah, do you want to remark on the best way to proceed before we go into discussions?
So the memo is really to help guide the discussion as well. The action plan items are things that we could touch on today and make decisions on for specific ones. And for the topic discussion, just to have that discuss the various topics that people have in mind, but not necessarily requesting a decision be made today about the topics. And then this also has subcommittees, so I've outlined a few logistical things and outreach things that all of the things that we have passed over the years. We tried to group them in some form of subcommittee, but again, this is, open to edit and interpretation. So if we want to go through the action plan items and then kind of flow into the subcommittees to see if it really captures everything that we have been doing, and then see if people are, have a specific committee that they would like to participate in. It is a year out, so we do have some time, but again, it is helpful to know what you're going to be helping out with so that we can organize those tasks. And I can certainly create a calendar or an event. Usually a lot of the work happens maybe 3 or 4 months right before the event. So a lot of this is planning out how we're going to attack the symposium next year. One thing that I did want to come away with today is finalizing a date and the 2 dates. I know we parted down to 1 day, and I'm assuming it's going to be a Saturday. If we want
First
to,
choice,
first or second choice, specify a date in April. That way I can take that date and see what event spaces are available for us. And I do have to work with the city manager's office just to see, the convention center is going to be available, so it helps to start with that date first.
Okay, thank you. So, I would like to, take this time to discuss, potential topics for the symposium. And I see we have Deborah Cat and the Hovels, Deborah and Richard in the audience. And, would you, may I, invite you to you have, proposed, a topic to staff. You have sent a proposal, and so we would like to hear about that. Would you, care to come up and talk to us about that? And,
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
this is a potential topic, for
Yes.
discussion today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Catherine and members. Dick and I and Richard and Sydney Williams started an organization called the Palm Springs Architectural Alliance about 5 years ago. Dick is gonna be nodding along with me because he had a little procedure today. So, we started this organization to bring together an alliance of all of the wonderful design and architecture and preservation groups that we have here in our valley. And our goal was to come up with projects that benefited us all, that we could do and pull in these other alliance organizations, each according to their means. We are unpaid. We are under the auspices of the Center for Creativity, which is an authorized federal nonprofit. And one of the projects that we identified was a book that is authored by Alan Hess with 5 other essayists, each speaking to things about which Alan is not an expert, like the tribe or specific sustainability issues in the valley, whatever, 5 different things that will be added to this book. It's well underway. We raised the money. We have gotten the approval of all of our organizations. And everybody's very excited about this book coming out. The book we should take delivery of in December of 24. So right now we're going through covers and page layouts, and it's looking beautiful, and it's gonna be a wonderful book. And the idea of the book is to establish the Palm Springs School as a school of architectural concepts and design, much like the Sarasota School or the New York 5 or Prairie School, schools of thought. We're very excited about the book, and we have been working with all of our donor organizations to start to come up with how will we launch this book. Rick Soley is publishing. We have a great designer out of Northern California. Everything is going along swimmingly. We've begun conversations with Modernism Week about what are some events beyond the symposium that we will be partnering with the museum on for that Modernism Week. All of the other community and book launch events and book tour events that we can do. And Dick and I looked at each other one day and thought, that could be a turnkey symposium for Preservation Matters. And so we proposed in very general terms what we could do around this topic and all of the adjacent topics with our alliance organizations like ModCom, Modernism Week, the city, the Historical Society, Preservation Foundation. All of these organizations could contribute, along with Alan Hess as our keynote speaker, about the book and the central tenets of this book. So we saw it as a valley-wide but Palm Springs centric topic that was very relevant for the idea of the symposium. So in a nutshell, that's it.
Right, I'd just like to add, I sat around this table for many years, and I know what it takes and the time and the dedication. And I just want to thank each of you for doing what you do. And then being involved with Preservation Matters, going back to the very beginning in 2014. I'm obviously always interested in continuing that move forward, because it's become very well established within the community of Palm Springs, and I'm constantly being asked, so when is the next symposium? So I'm delighted that you have it on your agenda. And so we are here to answer any questions that you might have. We'll be happy to do that.
Or if anybody just wants to give us a donation for the book.
So thank you for presenting that. And I agree with Dick that our community has really high expectations for us.
Yes.
When's the next symposium? It was built up to such a great event. that we have to continue this momentum in educating our community and our audience, and it's very important, to do. And of course, the Hogels have produced, our past, symposium very well. We sought you out and asked you, and you presented, so we know you know how to do a good,
We can do it.
do a good one. So I'd like for us to be able to ask you questions, if you don't mind, and we'll begin with, Vice Chair Nelson.
Great, the question for both of you. Can you explain very briefly how you see the time back to the drug preservation?
Sure. This book is about, through the decades from 1935 to 1975, architectural styles and movements and concepts that were prevalent. The important buildings that show those kinds of big thinking, inside, outside, sustainability, new technology, all of that. I think all of that ties very closely to what our purpose is in this group. And I think one of our big reasons for existing, and yours as well, is to educate the majority of the community, which may not have any appreciation at all for preservation or the assets of this community, to educate them further. Our book will go a long way, but it'll only go so far as those people who get it in their hands or visit the website. So the community symposium for us, Preservation Matters, I think this ties in perfectly because we can show examples throughout of these thoughts, and here's how they were preserved, and here's what we can look at today. We've been spitballing some ideas about how to organize and how to bring in other organizations, and also perhaps a self-driving tour of some of these exteriors that would illustrate these concepts and precepts, so that we can provide a map and people can go to these buildings and we'll call them out, but we're not necessarily going to trouble homeowners or get reservations or things like that, because that's proven not to have the follow through that we would all wish for. So anyway, that's kind of our thought. Our major goal is education, and therefore preservation of the wealth of architecture we have in this valley.
And I'd just like to add, look at this as as a movement. I lived 14 years in Sarasota before coming out here. And so I'm very well acquainted with those folks back there and the architects of that period. And it's so interesting to see the similarities. And it's like, I wonder if these guys all got together at a conference from time to time, because, you see the folded plate, and there you see the flat roof, you see the clear story. But it's different in the tropics than it is here. They had the same, they had different issues climate-wise compared to here. But the point is that this sometimes gets confused with our other project, which is creating a Bachelor of Science of Architecture on the COD campus with Cal Poly. So look at this as a movement, just like you did with the other ones that Deborah mentioned. And, we're known, obviously, over the years worldwide as a major mecca for architecture. However, there's something about when you establish it as a school, as a movement, and you see things in print, it's just amazing what that does. So we feel this is also very important for our image overall in the city on an international basis, as well as a local United States basis. So I just wanted to offer that as well. And because we have those wonderful architects back during that period, we have a plethora of different ways we can go and topics. So we'll be narrowing that down. So wanted to offer that as well.
So, speaking of school and education, so is it the intent that this could attract a lot of students, the next generation of architects?
Yes,
Is,
absolutely.
is the book gonna be used as a textbook or,
Yeah.
I mean, what's the audience?
I'm really happy you asked that, Catherine, because our intention is not to create yet another gorgeous coffee table book. I mean, we all own them all, but that's been done. What we're trying to do is establish the movement in Palm Springs and legitimize it internationally as a school of desert modernism during these key decades. And we've written the book, or Alan has written the book with our input to be used as a textbook in universities and colleges. So amazingly enough, it's also gorgeous, but we were holding our breath because we have so many vintage and so many new photographs, over 250, I believe, and about 10,000 more words than we bargained for. And Rizzoli and the book designer have gracefully woven them together into pages that we were gobsmacked, I would have to say, because I was like, oh God, I hope it doesn't look like a textbook, because I want everyone to want this book. It's beautiful, and it has everything in it, and it's extremely exciting, because I think the audience is the international aficionado and architectural tourist and all of us, but also that it be used to educate students. And specifically, the kids we're working on are local valley students who will have something that is just so special about this area to rely on.
And not ready to be revealed yet, though we're working on another.
I knew you were gonna do that.
That
Don't
involves the
listen to
students,
what he
I'll leave
said.
it at that.
It's a very big idea. We have a couple of our sleeves, but first we have to get the book done. And we thought maybe offering you a kind of a turnkey solution to 2025 Preservation Matters might be of interest, because you have so many other things to do, and we have nothing to do, so.
So are there other?
You say that now.
Yeah,
Are there
well,
other questions from the board? Any comments from the board? Yes, member Hanson.
Of course, me all the time, right?
yes,
Well, I really like the idea of having, we're moving from a 2-day
Yep.
tours,
Right.
in which you started, you've been involved forever as a key person. So to me, to have the continuity, particularly the first year out of maybe reshaping
Mhm.
is really tremendous, and believe me, they will be involved. So I mean, that opportunity to me alone is great. I guess the only thing I'm thinking about when you had talked about, the book being published and events around that
Mm.
is, do you think, and I'm sure you'll figure this out if we all go that way, but I'm just thinking, is there gonna be repetition? How is this gonna be a little bit different than some of the other things? And if you're gonna publish starting, I think you said late fall, or,
We should probably take delivery of the book December of 24, but it won't be released locally until Modernism Week.
okay. So again, how would we differentiate ourselves from Modernism Week? Are people already gonna be burned out on the idea because they've
Yeah.
attended some events and?
Well, here's one thing to kind of benchmark, I think, is the fray. All of the fray topics that are going on, and the fact that this is free. And it's community, and certainly we would have the book as the main topic, the ideas behind the book, I should say. The book is over here, but the main topics covered in the book would be the key part of the reason for the symposium. However, our intention for a community preservation matters of educating our community
Mhm.
would be to pull in our alliance organizations to cover topics that are of interest to the community and may not necessarily be in that book, and certainly won't be covered in the museum symposium, which will be focused, much like this year was focused on Brad Dunning, the editor, the Frey historian, the keynote by Paul Goldberger, and then the essayists who were involved. We also did that in conjunction with the museum, and we'll be doing that for February of 2025 as well, that same symposium. That will probably follow that kind of a format because it worked really well, and we have another book. But for the community event, it's a different issue. You know, that will certainly be the main topic.
For the community, that's where we're thinking, you know, where we would have the speakers coming in from
But push
all
the
over the
button,
country.
Dick, push your button.
She's trying to push your buttons.
I-
Oh, well,
Push your
she's
button.
done that before.
Yeah.
Watching you.
For the symposium. That's where we would use, our idea was to utilize our, allied organizations.
Yeah.
In a major way, because we wouldn't really have the budget to be bringing those speakers that
Yeah.
we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like at Modern Assembly. So that alone, and I so agree, and I thought about exactly, we talked about that back in the beginning, is, don't look, you know, how do we differentiate this? But keep the topic the same. And we feel that that is doable. And just with these twists that we're talking about, I think that's an excellent question, because that was the first thing I think that came to us when we first started talking about this. You know, should we do this? And, you know, and the other thing is, so many people I find that go to the museum and to the symposium, you know, which has some dollar amounts attached to it. So many of the preservation matters event, a lot of, I'm sure, there'll be some overlaps, but I really think when I think about the audience that we have, and particularly locally, I think it'll be a new subject, actually, almost totally, for so many. Not for everybody, but I look out over the audience and I looked, you know, and see who our registrations were at our symposium. And, you know, it's a wide international audience. So I think that's another thing, but, I think it's important for us to keep that in mind.
We have made a huge push to get students allowed to attend the symposium at the museum for free. And we had better turnout this year
Yeah.
than ever before, and I would really recommend that the city make that same push. Since it's a free event anyway, it comes down to marketing and reaching the educators. And Dick has bullied many instructors into bringing students, which is critical. I mean, those are the people that we're really talking to.
Yeah. These are students from Cal Poly Pomona and College of the Desert, but you know,
High
it could be
school.
students that could be expanded
Yeah.
to other schools, like, you know, USC as an example,
Yeah.
and UCLA. I mean, doesn't just have to end. That just happens to be who we're working with.
We'll
or-
get Marucci on that.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, and the,
We'll see about that.
and the students that make the architectural models.
Yeah.
You know, they usually don't come to the symposium.
Right.
You know, they have their models on view and they're out talking to the audience, and then it's time for the symposium to start, and then they can leave. So opening up to you know, the next generation and thinking about ways that we could do that.
Yeah.
So I know there are other questions, Vice Chair Nelson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick things. First question, I have two things. The first one is, can you share the title of the book?
Yes, the Palm Springs School, 1935 to 1975.
Okay, great. And then secondly, I'm glad that Member Hanson asked about distinguishing this event
Yeah.
from other things you might do after the book comes out, Modern Assembly. And one thought I had, well, since this was the 10th anniversary, maybe time whatever you present or whatever anyone presents in regards to the book is to tie it back to each of the 10 years of Preservation Matters and all of the buildings or people that were recognized if they are also mentioned in the book. Because then it's a crossover thing. It's
I
like,
see.
so this is in the book, and in 2019, the city honored this building, and just make sure that there's overlap, that it's equal part city and architectural lines.
That's
the
an
book,
interesting
because
idea.
this is obviously the city sponsored event for the Historic Site Preservation Board.
Sure.
That's just an idea.
And we do want to continue the awards So that would be a good introduction for the awards.
Yeah,
Yay.
Yeah, so, yeah. Members
So
from
can you be more specific about how you would involve the other organizations, the other, like, for instance, the modern committee, what exactly?
you, for instance, have a vested interest in it?
Not at all,
No.
but
Yeah.
seriously though, I mean, what
Well,
would we
we've,
do?
we've made a very rough proposal to Sarah and this board because, you know, the last time I was here, I said, I'm not doing this anymore, and you all decided to wait a year and then come back, and then I woke up with Dick, no, I didn't wake up. Dick woke up in one home and I woke up in another. And we got our heads together about this idea, which I think could work, but it's still sort of an amorphous idea for us, is that we give you this turnkey thing. And then we said, well, it can't be the same as what we're doing at the museum, because we can't afford and the city won't pay to bring in all those speakers. So we thought, oh, what do we do? Well, we have a wealth of local experts on things. For example, ModCom is doing all of this work with student education. Perhaps there's a way that they can speak about the next generation, which is, you know, one of the topics of the book. Or there is the tramway is one of the, or the tram guest, what's the name, visitor center. Is something that is near and dear to ModCom. And perhaps there's a presentation done on that and how that happened and all of it. Because remember, we're talking to the community that may or may not know that story. So that would be one example, but we have not really fleshed it out. We only know that between the 9 alliance organizations
Yeah.
that we're involved with, that there are certainly topics that could be handled by someone on that, you know, out of that organization.
And Mr. Marisi, one of the things that I would love to see is, even though I heard about it before, I knew about it, but your description of how really Palm Springs, the preservation movement started. That event about the visitor center and everybody wore their hats. And, but listening to you and Brad Dunning go back and forth during the time that we went on that pre-event tour was really amazing. And it really does go back to the roots of, I think of when preservation really kicked back in. And of course, that was after the box office tragedy at the Plaza Theater, realized that. But that's when the organizations really, and you talked about, you know, all the other organizations that were involved as well, like the SPF. And so, you know, that's sort of a lead in to Preservation Matters.
And why?
And here we are today, many years later. It was really interesting.
And those are stories that a lot of people have not heard.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty broad umbrella. It's
Very
not
much.
just about.
Yeah.
The book.
No,
No.
no, the book is a good starting topic, and certainly a large portion of the morning, for example, would be devoted to Alan Hess talking about his expertise and through the decades and perhaps tying it back or whatever, but then all of these other things, similar to the way the essays enrich the book. The topic is broad, but there are specific areas of interest that I think we might think the community might be very interested in.
But the first part might sound exactly like, you know, if Alan Hess is speaking, and he just did the previous, 2 months earlier, it really
Not the
would have.
same audience, though. Yeah.
Some crossover, I don't know, I wouldn't want it to be the same speech, the same
it
that he
can't.
gave 2 months earlier.
Right.
Not only
Especially the half
that,
a day.
not only that, I think
No, but you're
that
saying it's
the
parts, so.
the community may not be interested in that level of detail as a symposium at the museum attendee.
Sure, I mean, obviously Alan was capable of presenting anything.
Yeah.
Because he's so brilliant.
Yeah.
But I just would not want it to mirror what you had said
I don't believe.
2
it
months earlier.
would.
That's good.
Yeah,
If I
Anyway.
could just say something about that, I'm not sure I wouldn't like it to mirror what he says at the museum, because I do see a typically different audience for preservation matters, and I think they should have access to the same kind of information, and we shouldn't be too quick to try and tailor something to what we think they might like.
So you're concerned with dumbing down.
Thank you for
We
putting the
won't-
words in my
We
mouth.
won't do that. I'm kind of a straight shooter. Our intention would never be to do that, but it would be to make sure that if you attended both, you might learn something new.
Absolutely, and if you've ever presented it, and I know you have, you've tailored your stock speech to your audience.
As Alan would.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, any other comments by Vice Chair Nelson?
So over the years, the preservation matters, both Dick and myself and other people who were involved over the years worked very hard year over year to make sure, as you know, and as you did, to make sure that it was fun, witty, and engaging. I've heard Alan speak, I've heard other people speak, and the last thing we want for this to feel like a classroom lecture, so to speak. And because it is written as a textbook, we obviously will have to find ways to make this like you do with Mud with a Twist, which we have been doing for years. So to take those very serious topics about the school and turn them into the witty, irreverent, yet educational presentation without being too scholarly, because I think the community has come to see our event as something, even though it's educational, it's fun and it's enlightening, but they don't want to be bored. They don't want to like be standing there or sitting there and listening to someone drone on, if you get my drift. And we never really had that problem, but I could see how we might if we're basing something on a book, so to speak.
I think that, the book might shock you in how entertaining it is.
All right.
And maybe, I'm just sitting here thinking, you know,
Oh, boy.
we only want to do, just if it makes, perfect sense to all of you. We got a lot on our plate.
Yeah,
And so if we were to do it, Kate, and if you all invited us to do it, be it a full day, half day, you have to give us some license. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna be really honest about it. We just don't have time to go through a lot of, back and forth kind of thing. So you've seen what we've done over the years. And I can tell you, I started this, 2014 in the Women's Club. And then at the Temple Isaiah, it didn't really come to life until Deborah and Richard Vogel did the production. It was like a day and night change. So again, there has to be a certain trust level, and we totally understand if, you know, this isn't
Yeah.
a bit
it's just an idea.
at all, just an idea that we'd like to
Yeah.
propose, because we love the idea of the preservation matters, and it's important that it goes forward. But just so you know, we are very much, we understand, you know, it's up to you guys, but
Well, the topic is most relevant and meaningful and international. It touches all that we need.
Mhm.
And well, I'm very much in favor of the proposal. Are there other proposals or topics?
Can I just ask
Sure.
one final question on that?
Member Hanson?
And I know this is, this is sort of starting point tonight, but so if this idea went forward with all board members, do you foresee, you know, because we're gonna have, getting back to that, which I was gonna say,
Mhm.
the subcommittees. So if we have a subcommittee related to speakers and presenters, a subcommittee possibly, you know, then working with you.
That would be us, and we
Yes.
would have Sarah.
So you'd be the subcommittee.
We would do the work, it'd be as turnkey as possible. I laid out to Sarah some specific things that, you know, we can't be incurring big investments in this. Because we're small and ad hoc. But for example, the city would do the venue, the city would do the recording and the captioning or whatever, you know, pretty much the stuff the city did before. The city would post on YouTube, the city would do all the things you end up having to do. But we would create this module that is plug and play. And we request one contact person to avoid meetings on meetings on meetings, and it would require trust on your part. And we completely understand if there are other better ideas that work better for your committee. We're just one idea, but it is kind of appealing in that it is plug and play.
Okay, he's got me sold.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I love the idea, quite frankly. I think it's wonderful. And I wonder if you have an idea for a venue for this?
That would be up to the city.
Yeah, again, I think you mentioned the city, okay, the venue part, we're just look at this at the production end of things. So again, the HSBB would be organizing like the registration as an example, the same, you know, the student models. Your, whoever you select for your awardee,
Mhm.
all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Operational, I think you would.
As
you could
normal.
Put them in, as typically would. And so just look at that, and we come in with, you know, again, whether it's a half day, whether it's a full day.
Yeah, we'll have to determine that if you want to proceed.
I was gonna ask that, because we had thought last time that we would do a full day
Mhm.
with an actual box lunch, so
Mhm.
everybody
Mhm.
stays in the same place, and chat at lunch.
But you may want to take half a day for the board to do things, you know, so.
We'll mix it in,
Yeah.
So Sarah, would you like to make some comments and give us some guidance on how you might recommend we proceed?
Sure. Again, I mean, this is an opportunity to kind of have the discussion for different topics, and of course, Deborah.
Are we excused?
Or you can sit there, it's okay. But the polls before you, you know, we want to really actually distill the topic at hand, and it's related to the Palm Springs School. And topics that will come out of that book that we can use as part of our symposium. On top of that, you know, they're presenting a little bit more in terms of helping us with the logistical portions of it. But again, the topic that's before you is that Palm Springs, school. So I want that to be part of the mix. Deborah and Dick both have given me some additional information that I can share with, the rest of HSBB, so that you can take a look at that information as well, to have a more informed decision. But it was really nice of them to be here today to answer some of those questions and, you know, present the case that they've made. And so it's super helpful, and of course, we'll take more questions, and can put everyone in connection with them if you have additional questions. It is one topic, and if the board members have other topics that they had in mind, I think it's a great time to just kind of put it all out there. It's more of like a brain dump, if you will, of just different topics to understand, this is what I'm seeing, this is what we're seeing. And then we can kind of go from there on the topic selection, because we do have a little bit of time to be able to go back and kind of think about it. And then ideally, we would like to land on a topic that we can run with by the end of this month, so that we can start to put logistical things together. And that way we can give this team also an answer on what we're thinking, so that, you know, if we do go that way, we have more planning to do as well. So I would think that.
So do we agree on the topic, and then if anybody wants to offer other approaches?
Yeah, I think it's like to just open up the floor to see if there are any other topics.
Okay, member
Is it
Marusi?
topics?
I think in the past, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we had one overarching topic, like a theme, correct? Yeah, so if we had a theme, and then we had these different topics that fed into the main theme. So if there are themes, in general that people had in mind, I think we can put those out. With the understanding that we would have to feed that theme with at least 4 or 5 presentations to fill up that day.
Okay, any other comments, member Hare?
Just a question, if we need to land on a topic by the end of the month, how do we do that without meeting until next month?
So what I can do is, I can send out an email, and we can kind of compile that information together, and we can conduct that collection of ideas, disseminate it via email, and then we can have that discussion either at the next meeting, or I can check with our city attorney just to make sure we're not, making any decisions via email that were against the Brown Act and things like that, so we can confirm that. But I think for collecting ideas, you can send them to me. If you don't want to present anything tonight, and then I can collect that and disseminate that and then figure out what the best way is to settle on a topic.
May I ask, if this is proper, does anybody have any better ideas?
I was just going to say, I think it would be a huge dereliction of duty to not move on something like this tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in favor of it. I stated that. Janet, you made some really good, positions. How does yes.
So my question is, what day are you available in April? And then we can decide that as well.
Yeah, that's true. We're waiting to hear from you. That's why we need to know ASAP. If we're gonna do it, because believe me, we have other things on our plate. We're sitting here going, do we want to win this battle? Or do we really wish we want this? Yeah, we do, and we're committed to doing it if you want us to. And we need to figure out the date, but we can figure that out together.
So could we agree, that we would like to move forward on this, everyone agree that we would like to move forward with this proposal, and then ask Sarah to, work it out. And then dates, of course.
Yeah, so actually, if we can pull up the calendar real quick, there's only 4 Saturdays in April.
Yeah,
And so
for
maybe we can-
Saturdays.
Yeah, we can take a look, and see what we can work with. Again, we would have to also see what venue, we can get for the event too, so there's a couple moving parts here.
I mean, did you want us to at least say what works for us at this point?
In the past, haven't we been like, the last weekend in
It
April?
has been, yes.
So, 26, 27,
Because of the festivals, the music festivals.
I think that's what we should shoot for, and, the onus for venue is on you, Sarah, so. I'm gonna block that out, so no trips to Europe for you.
And maybe the first weekend of April as a backup.
So is it better to have the first week, the 5th as a backup? So the 26th and then the backup as the 5th? Is that, we do need a backup date, Justin.
So going back to the music festivals, Coachella and Stagecoach,
Mhm.
I had received a lot of complaints from our out-of-towners that came in, they couldn't afford the hotel rooms
Yeah.
because of the music festivals. And they said, please don't have it when the hotel rooms are all booked up.
So
So
the 26th and
giving
27th,
consideration for that.
yeah, are past Coachella.
Well, I know the middle 2 weekends of April are Coachella, and then the
Yeah.
last weekend is Stagecoach. Typically, so the first weekend of April isn't any music festival, that's why I recommended it. So,
Yeah,
We could make that work. My goal is to get it on my calendar ASAP so that, we don't have conflicts. So that would be the 5th then, Jade, right? I'm sorry.
Yes, that's correct.
yeah, April. Mhm.
So I'm gonna block that out.
Okay, so it seems like our number 1 choice is gonna be that April 26th weekend, and then the second would be the April 5th. And then I can work with, our offices here to see if the convention center is available for us, either of those dates, preferably the 26th, and then come back.
Let me just say that not the
I thought
twenty-sixth,
you said that, yeah.
because of both stagecoach, we would do the fifth.
We do the fifth.
Oh, we would do.
Fifth is the
Fifth earlier.
primary.
Fifth is
Fifth is
first
the
choice.
But,
Okay.
but thank you, Peter.
Yeah, yeah.
So Dick and Richard and I would like to say thank you. We won't disappoint. We'll be in touch.
Sounds good.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So just to confirm, April 5th is our number one. And then the 26th.
There is no number two.
There's no number two, we gotta get.
I
the
mean, if
fifth.
anything, it would be the week before.
So,
I mean, what if we did it, if we don't wanna bump into any of the festivals, why don't we do it the second choice be the previous
May.
weekend? No, March.
Yeah,
I
this-
mean, in March.
The issue we've heard in the past is that typically those are getting into season and more events are booked during those times of the year with the convention center.
Oh, but late March?
Yes,
March.
so
Let's just hope
so
so.
April, May is really
Jesus.
more preferable.
Sorry.
time.
So then, Sarah, you'll work with the staff in establishing
Yeah,
what's
we'll-
possible with that as the guideline.
Yeah, okay,
Mhm.
we'll do that, and
That's
then I'll go back.
Okay, and was there any more comments?
Yeah.
Chair Nelson?
So before we move away from that entirely, I'm so glad we had that gift on a silver platter. I think it's wonderful. But I did want to say that I had made a previous suggestion for an event. And I had given Tom Dole my word that I would bring it up tonight again. And that is this whole push around the 50th anniversary of Sunrise Park. And everything that pertains to Sunrise Park in terms of its architecture, its history, and the ongoing master plan that's currently in process. So what I think is maybe some of that can become part of our work plan. And the beauty of what they just did is that it frees us up to work on everything we just talked about, previous agenda item. So I love that because we can really focus on the inventory, the maintenance and the training, which I think we couldn't focus on last year because we were so into this whole conservation matters thing. So, but I would love if whole presentation was made to this board if the board hasn't seen it yet. And for the historic site board to somehow be involved with that process. Because I think it's really important. I think it's a project that will bring in many different commissions. Sustainability, planning, and there's no reason why HSBB shouldn't be part of that at some point. So, thank you.
Very good point, very good. Okay, so let's proceed with other board comments at this time. Are there any other comments from the board about other subjects or anything? Yes, member Hare.
I just wanted to be sure to take a moment to remind everyone that on March 23rd, it's the Luminaire House
Oh, yeah.
official opening, 2:30 ribbon cutting. We should all.
Yes, yeah.
Can
We received special invitations.
We did, but I didn't see anything. I thought there would be something on the museum website to register, or you don't? You can just
No.
show up.
There's no registration. It's out completely open.
Okay, just show up.
Mhm. Good, thank you for that. Any other board comments at this time? Any others? Okay, so how about comments from the staff? Do you have any comments from the staff?
I have two, just quick updates. So, we are working on an informational meeting from, the airport, just to give us kind of some updates related to the progress there. And so we're working on scheduling them to come. It would be during staff comments where they just, again, it'd be an informational meeting, just giving us an update. So we're working on that and I wanted you guys to be aware of that. Yes.
How soon would that be potentially?
We're trying to see if we can get them in next month. So, and then, I have one more quick update on the Bank of America building. So I'm sure everyone has realized or has seen it from, driving by town. I did go on a site visit yesterday just to see how things are buttoning up, and it looks like in terms of their schedule, the scaffolding should be coming down in the next couple of weeks. They are really kind of at the end of the line here in terms of finishing up. It's been a long process, but they really have, you know, that whole process opened a Pandora's box really of all the things that they had to address, which started with some, you know, internal changes, internal updates that morphed into a complete restoration of the curtain wall system, the soffit, you know, they started opening things up and they found all this damage.
Mm.
And so they have been very communicative about the things that they kept running into. But I did do a site visit. They've been very meticulous about how they have been restoring a lot of those important character defining features. And so they're projected to turn over the site early May and hopefully open the bank for service at the end of May.
Wow.
I wanted to give you that perspective.
Have to have a celebration.
How long has that been going on?
It's certainly been going on before I've gotten here. And I know, like I said, I don't think that was the intent. It was,
Yeah.
as it continued to morph into a very large project.
Vice Chair Nelson.
Yeah, so question regarding that, I was on board when we designated that building as cluster site. And back in those days, some buildings had a dedication ceremony and the mayor was present. And we put the plaque in the building and people were there and it was really cool and enthralling. So I'm wondering if because of everything the bank has gone through, if it might be a good use of HSPB resources and a good community thing to have a rededication ceremony, because what they have done at this bank is nothing short of monumental. And I think it should be celebrated as one of the successes, the city and the HSPB. So I would love to see us do little events like that in addition to Preservation Matters, because it's a really good community outreach type of thing. And I think it makes people feel included and they can be invited and they can all stand there and take part in the reopening of this building.
Yeah, I agree.
I would say that there is probably a lot of logistical things to figure out if that's
Of course.
a piece of it. I think that there may be some other opportunities if that doesn't actually turn into an actual dedication ceremony, but something we can promote on the website or on our social media or something along those lines. And then keep into account, we do have the preservation awards too, so that's something that we've always used as a method of acknowledging certain projects, just to keep in line and making sure that that award becomes something that is a statement from the board. So different ideas there, but I think I do appreciate knowing that history. Again, I hesitate only because there's a lot of logistical planning that needs to happen with those things. And I'm not sure if we can actually make it happen by May, but maybe there are other ways we can supplement their opening and then plan for a more strategic acknowledgement of the project.
It could even be in partnership with one of the local organizations that may be in the park when more people are here and back and able to attend.
Why not propose this to the bank themselves?
Yeah,
Maybe they'd love to do it,
yeah, and
to
that's,
celebrate all the money they've spent on this thing.
Yeah.
It
I'd like to
would be
know
good
how much.
PR for them.
yeah, and I do believe they're planning to do some sort of opening of the bank and of the services and
Well,
things
maybe we
like that.
should
So
at
something
least-
we can,
Part of that, understand what they're doing and recommend that it be more than just them. that We could participate in some way, without you having to do all the work to organize it. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think we should celebrate it. It's a big deal.
I do.
I mean, how many commercial property owners want to spend that kind of money
Yeah.
well, that's
on
very true.
an important building like that?
It certainly has been a monumental project.
And we can certainly still, if we choose, give them an award in, whatever, I guess it'll be April of next year.
So with them coming to this meeting to present and give us an update.
But they don't have to do that.
Not the Bank of America, that
No,
would
but
be,
that's the airport.
that's the airport.
But
Oh, the airport,
yeah, the airport, but they wouldn't.
No, that was just an update for me, because I was
Yeah.
on the site visit
Yeah,
yesterday.
that's right.
just
Well,
keeping
thank you.
guys
Yeah, that
updated
would have
about
been
what I saw there.
Another idea.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All
Just
right.
a quick
Yes.
question,
Uh-huh.
please. Does the city of Palm Springs, do commendations, and does the board present commendations on behalf of the city? You know, those sort of calligraphy, things that
Whereas,
go on vanity
We have
walls.
a mayor for that,
whereas.
Yeah, that would be the mayor.
right? Cause
I
he
mean-
he only has 1 year to do all these commendations, then moves on to the new mayor.
Well, I was just wondering if.
No, I think it's a great idea for the mayor to be participating, but why not? And they do the accommodations, the city prepares them, and the mayor presents them in formal, part of the celebration.
Okay.
It's a great idea.
Recommendation.
Yeah.
Good, whereas.
Whereas,
Okay.
whereas.
Okay, are there any other discussions, comments for today? Any others? Okay, so seeing no further discussions, this meeting of the Historic Site Preservation Board is adjourned to the meeting of Tuesday, April 2nd, 2024 at 5:30. So thank you all for your participation. Bye-bye.
You're so polite.